Hey, I'm covering Module 1, the Erie Canal. I'm going to talk about the history and the circumstances that led up to the canal being built and the effects that it had on America. So, what is history? History is a study of change over time and how it affects individuals all the way up to governments and nations. Most information about history is gained from text, and our interpretation is always changing. America before the canal was highly individual, and people were still mostly self reliant farmers. Very little lived in the West, and technology was fairly primitive. And at the same time, large scale trade was primarily across the Atlantic with triangle trade. These circumstances were perfect to build a canal that stretched west. America would gain tons of resources that would help us gain more independence and strength, and we would also get to use way more of our vast landmass. America's engineers at the time weren't ready to build a canal, though. They had little training and needed some influence from more experienced countries like France and Britain, both of which had opposing philosophies when it came to engineering. French engineers, on one hand, valued theory over practice. They were trained and hired by the state and were composed mostly of the upper middle class. These engineers were well versed in large scale infrastructure projects such as canals. British engineers were the opposite. Their work was done through tinkering and getting things to work while not caring why they worked. They were trained on the job through apprenticeships and came from working class backgrounds. Once work started on the canal, many challenges were recognized, the largest being that workers had zero experience related to canal building. Also, tinkering would not work for this situation because it's such a large endeavor, not to mention issues like cutting the rock and managing leaks. With no one experienced enough to head the project, 3 judges and 1 school teacher were appointed as superintendents. The inexperienced workers learned on the job, and the lead engineer, Benjamin Wright, learned a little about canals through the experienced Brit William Weston. Repeated failures were made when finding methods for building the locks and the walls, but solutions were eventually found. The completion of the canal had serious effects on not only large parties, but individuals as well. A positive example is that New York now had a lot more resources to work with, while a negative one is that the area that is now Canada was no longer a major trade route. The canal had major effects on engineering too. People who worked on the canal now had serious experience under their belt and were able to make names for themselves in the world of engineering.
Hi everyone, this is how engineering becomes a profession. In the 19th century, there was a shift from individuals with technical skills and using them to improve their lives, to individuals earning a living based on those skills. So we were forced to ask, why did this change happen? We realized the benefits engineering could have on our nation and its economy, which was evident after the Erie Canal was completed. This led to large investments in bringing up a new generation of engineers. During the construction of the Erie Canal, it was realized that more complex engineering projects need a greater engineering knowledge, which led to the development of engineering colleges. One of the first engineering schools was West Point Academy, where engineering was used for the improvements in the military. Once out of the military, graduates were able to work as civil engineers and/or become teachers of engineering themselves. This allowed engineering programs to move into other major universities as time went on. This expanding education expanded further with the Morrill Land Grant Act, which gave land to states that they could sell for the purpose of funding agriculture and technical schools. This increased access to an engineering education for many, dramatically increasing the number of engineers in America at the time. These universities prioritized research and community outreach, sharing the knowledge that they discovered, increasing crop yields, revolutionizing food storage, and improving mechanical systems. Although engineering education is becoming more accessible, many are still excluded. States chose to have segregated schools that offered a lesser education, or they simply rejected applicants. If you were not a white male, becoming an engineer was still very difficult. As time goes on, the form of education changes. We move from the British style of hands-on learning to the French style of theory. This is for a couple of reasons. One being that engineering increasingly becomes more complex, which relies more on theory than it does tinkering. And the other is that there's a higher social prestige involved with a theoretical understanding. Unlike doctors, lawyers, and the clergy, engineering did not come with a social prestige, and this yearning for prestige led to the formation of professional societies. They had the goals of increasing their status in society, increasing their compensation, advancing their profession's aims, and to retain a measure of independence from their employers. Now, these societies had different requirements for joining and had different.
This is Module 3, which focuses on the late 19th century to the early 20th century. It was a time of some of the most recognized inventors like Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, the Wright brothers, and Alexander Graham Bell. And in this time, there was a shift from independent inventors to corporate inventions. Independent inventors made radical inventions most of the time that would put an industry out of business. It's cars, planes, phones, and radios. But the problem for independent investors was that they struggled securing funding. Um, so along came corporate inventors, or these were actually characterized as conservative inventions, or improvements on existing tech. And they were able to solve the issue of being able to have funding. Edison was a good example of this. He really marked the shift from independent to corporate. He started out as an independent inventor, but later started Menlo Park, the Menlo Park Workshop, where he uh, hired many inventors. Bell Labs opened, and it really dominated in that area. They had really great financial support. They had a huge staff, and there was a blending of varied ideas. You had chemists, mathematicians, and physicists all coming together and learning from each other. And those chemists, mathematicians, and the physicists stopped being specialized to that area and became generalized in many areas and really expanded their knowledge and worked together. And this really gave them a major advantage. But there are some downsides to corporate inventions, which were that those the inventions explored um, by corporate inventors were encapsulated in a much narrower field, um, and the inventors received less acclaim. And worst of all, minorities and women were excluded from this area of invention. They were really only able to find the ability to invent as independent inventors.